What's up, guys? It's Lord Both here for another video, and now, apparently, we have trade wars. Trade wars, nothing but trade wars. Now we got trade wars. Hollywood's and I say that, well, rather sing it, because Hollywood is in a very bad position because of these trade wars. Why? Because, well, a simple answer. China.
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 China. China. China. China. China. China. China. China.
This comes to us from Twitter via Unusual Whales, in which it states, White House says 104% tariffs on China went into effect today. That's right, Big Daddy Trump slapped China with tariffs, and not just the little tariffs, he slapped them with the whole long sausage of tariffs. 104% of tariffs. And let's just say this was not well received by President Pooh Bear and the gang of Reds that run China. Because now, and this comes to us from Discussing Film on Twitter, China is reportedly considering banning the import of US films into China as part of its major countermeasures against the US tariffs. Which it seems like a strange economic card to play from China, but apparently they're doing it. Now I say it's a strange move because you would think films not being accessible to the Chinese market would be terrible overall for the film industry. That said, I bring up a counter argument, Top Gun Maverick, which proved that if you make a good movie and you hype it up a little bit, build interest, promise people a certain thing, and then deliver on that thing, maybe even beyond people's expectations, word of mouth will win out the day. And you can have a brilliantly successful movie without involving the Chinese. Except maybe when you get takeout after the movie.
Welcome to Shitty Walk. Can I take an order, please?
Now I know a lot of you say, well, what about the movies that really appeal to an international audience? That the giant studios really rely on? Well, I would say that it all really depends on what studios you're really looking at. Because the Minecraft movie, which apparently is doing really, really well, like could do $2 billion level of well, is already planning their sequel after their first week of numbers. And how much has China really contributed to that? About 14.5 million of the 313 million worldwide. So even without China, this movie would have gotten really, really close to $300 million. Also, if you look up numbers for things like Robert Pattinson's The Batman movie, or even Barbie, those movies for Warner Brothers didn't actually make a whole ton of money in the Chinese market. It was in other places, most of it domestically, that those films succeeded. And of course, there was also the original Joker movie, which despite the fact that Joker 2 absolutely is ruined now, the Joker movie made $1 billion without ever touching the Chinese market at all, too. Now, while Warner Brothers is essentially the addicted gambler who gets down to betting his mortgage right before he throws the dice again, and then finally hits luck and wins, only to go back to the table the next day and gamble on another failure.
I have to have quarters, Will. Wait, see, I know I can beat it.
Carl,
see,
listen,
it was bell, cherry.
Right.
And then cherry, lemon.
Carlton.
But now it's just cherry, bell. Cherry, bell. Cherry, bell. Every time, cherry, bell.
Carlton!
While that company might not be greatly affected by this whole idea of a Chinese ban, there is another major player that will be pretty greatly affected by it. The real question is, would anybody here in the United States actually care? The company, of course, I'm talking about is Disney. Now, why would Disney be affected by the Chinese ban? Well, let's go take a look at some of the numbers. These are some of the biggest films for Disney in their Marvel Cinematic Universe. Avengers Endgame, of the $2.8 billion that this movie made, 632 million of it came from China. So not a tiny percentage here. Avengers Infinity War, of the $2 billion worldwide that this movie made, 359 million of it came from China. Spider-Man Homecoming, of the $880 million that this made, China was accounted for 116 million of it. When you add the Chinese numbers and the domestic numbers, the Chinese numbers, along with the domestic numbers alone, were about half the gross for Spider-Man Homecoming. And here's the big one. If any movie franchise has a massive Chinese audience that is put out by Disney, it is the Avatar series. Of the $2.3 billion that Avatar Way of the Water made, China was 245, almost 246 million of that. China had the single highest gross for this movie of any country outside of the United States. Now, does this mean that these movie franchises will flop and automatically fold, and the companies will take major hits and losses because they don't have access to the Chinese market? No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean that these companies will take a hit, and they are not in a position cash-wise to turn down any sales, especially sales to a market as big as this. Because if you haven't looked at the state of Marvel recently, it's kinda at a down point. Warner Brothers, even though we just talked about how they're not going to be super affected by this from what the numbers say, they're also probably going to release Superman in China. And the life of James Gunn's franchise pretty much depends on whether or not Superman is a financial success or failure. And while Avatar makes a ton of money, it also is very, very costly to make those films. These CGI slop fests are not cheap to make anymore. It's almost like building practical designs would be better from an actual viewing standpoint and an economic standpoint now. Something to think about.
Wait a minute!
The point here is that these companies, whatever strain was on them already, there's going to be even more strain on them, as now they might not have access to Chinese markets. Meanwhile, China is actually developing their own movies now, one of which grossed like north of $2 billion recently. It was like the most seen movie in China ever, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the United States. It was a completely Chinese story. So what money they could maybe get still out of the Chinese markets, even if it does open up later, probably not going to be the same as it is now. Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see how these big studios cope with this. My guess is you're going to see even more canceled projects. And from the standpoint of somebody who doesn't really like these big studios, doesn't like the slop they're putting out right now, I gotta say, this might actually be a good thing as somebody who lives here in the United States. I'm in the position of, all right, China, your terms are acceptable. But those are just my thoughts on all this. If you have your own thoughts, go ahead and leave in the comments. If you like this video, go and like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like this video, I appreciate you watching all of it, and we'll talk to you again later.